Abstract reasoning is one of those sections where you either get it or you don't. Some people naturally find it really easy, and to be honest, I envy them. I always used to struggle with non-verbal in CAT tests, and when it came to abstract reasoning in the UCAT, it was no different. For ages I struggled and could not get my head around it. However, by a lot of hard work and some miracle too, to be honest, it ended up going from my worst section to my best in my final test. In this video, I'm going to go through how I prepared for abstract reasoning and some tips and tricks on how to answer questions that do come up. So this section is made up of 50 questions, which you have 12 minutes to answer, which means you have approximately 14 seconds per question. I know that sounds ridiculously time pressured, but I promise you it actually feels a lot less so than other sections like verbal reasoning, for example. So what are the question styles that come up on the abstract reasoning section of the UCAT exam? There are 4 types of questions that do come up, and I'll give a brief overview of them now and then go into a bit more detail later on how to attempt each of them. Type 1 is where you're given 2 sets of shapes or boxes, so set A and set B, and you're given another shape or box and you have to deduce which set that belongs to, set A, B, or neither of them. Type 2 shows a sequence of different shapes. Now you're given 4 different options and you have to deduce which shape comes next in the sequence. Type 3 questions is when you're shown how one shape transforms into another, and now you're given a third shape, and now you have to find, with the same transformation, what that shape turns into out of the 4 answer options. Type 4 questions are very similar to type 1, however instead you're given 4 options and you have to deduce which one of the 4 belong to either set A or set B. So now in terms of approaching these questions, so the majority of questions you'll face will be either type 1 or type 4. Now you'll be given 5 questions on the same set, which means you have approximately 1 minute per set. Naturally, on the first question of each set, you'll take a bit longer to kind of figure out the pattern. And once you've done so, you can really speed through the next 4 questions. Sounds easy enough, right? However, the hardest bit for me was to actually figure out the patterns. For ages, I could not, for the life of me, spot the patterns. But that's when I came across several mnemonics. I've heard of things like scan, cones, CPR, but personally the one that I found most useful was scans. It stands for shape, colour, angle or arrangement, number, and then either size or symmetry. So for shape, what shapes are there? Is there one or many different types of shape? Are there irregular or regular shapes? Are the shapes straight-edged or curved? For colour, are any of the shapes coloured in? How many different types of colours are there? Are certain shapes certain colours? For angle or arrangement, where are the shapes located? Where's the relative position of one shape to another? Is a circle always next to a square? Or for angle, for example, how many right angles are there? Are there any obtuse angles? If it's a clock-based question, are all the angles smaller than 90 degrees? Are they all bigger than 90 degrees? For number, what is the total number of shapes there are? How many of each shape are there? How many circles or squares are there? How many shaded shapes are there? How many sides are in the entire box? Are there an odd number of sides on all the shapes or an even number of sides? Is there an even number of shapes in total, an odd number of coloured shapes? For symmetry or size, how many lines of symmetry does each shape have? Are certain shapes bigger than others? Are all the squares big and all the circles are small? Or are the coloured shapes big and the white shapes are small? Remember, you can combine many of these different categories, as there may be several different patterns or sub-patterns. There are also many other questions you can ask within each category. These are just some examples that I've given. And there are several other mnemonics that you may find more useful than the one I've just given. It's really important to find what works best for you, so you're able to attempt the questions as efficiently as you possibly can. My strategy on tackling these questions is to first run through the scans mnemonic in my head. So I would ask myself all of these different questions that I've mentioned and look for any patterns. By doing lots and lots of questions, I would see many patterns repeating or being very similar to ones that I've seen before. So I would stress that practice and consistency with your preparation will really help you become better and faster at spotting patterns in abstract reasoning. So, in terms of how you should prepare for abstract reasoning, like I've mentioned in my other UCAT videos, The only way you'll improve is by doing lots and lots of questions. If abstract reasoning is your worst section, then as much as you probably hate it, you should spend more time and put more emphasis on that. So of course at first I started doing questions with no time pressure to kind of familiarize myself with the question styles and to kind of gather techniques to answering them. And to be honest, I was really unsuccessful with this at first. I then moved on quickly to time practice in small batches and then up to full 50 question mocks. Ensuring you're doing time practice as early as possible is absolutely crucial, as it's really the most realistic type of practice you can be doing to prepare for your actual exam. Another thing that is so important is to review the answers that you get wrong. Understand why you got the question wrong. Maybe you were rushed for time, maybe you misunderstood the pattern, maybe you couldn't figure out the pattern at all. Doing so will really help you learn from your mistakes so you don't do them again. Something that I didn't personally do, but I've heard can be quite useful, is to make a list of all the patterns that you come across. As I've mentioned before, many patterns are quite repetitive, so by creating a list and reading it every so often, you'll become more familiar with these patterns and you'll be able to spot them a lot quicker. So finally, some general tips on preparation and tackling abstract reasoning in the UCAT. First of all, don't waste your time and know when to move on. If you can't spot a pattern within a minute, the likelihood is you won't be able to after a few minutes, and you'll just end up staring at your screen blankly and wasting lots and lots of time where you could have spent just answering a lot of easier questions. And to be honest, this is something that I really did struggle with initially, and I spent a lot of time just trying to figure out one pattern when I could have been answering other questions. Now for those type 2 and type 3 questions where they're not in sets, you have 14 seconds per question, which is very little amount of time. So if you're not able to answer in 20 seconds, I would say guess flag and move on, so you can spend your time on the batches of 5 type 1 or type 4 questions where you can bang out more questions a lot faster. My next tip is to always start with the simplest box. In the type 1 and type 4 questions, some boxes may be more complex than others. By starting with the simplest box, there is much less to focus on and it will be a lot easier to actually spot the pattern. And finally, beware of distractors. These are pieces of information within the boxes like different shapes or colours that have nothing to do with the pattern and are just there to throw you off. Hence, as I mentioned, looking at the simplest box first is really helpful, as it will contain the least amount of distractors. I hope my strategies and tips were useful and you're now equipped with the information needed to go there and smash your abstract reasoning. Please feel free to like, comment and subscribe, and look out for my other videos on the other UCAT sections and also other videos coming out in the future to help you with your medicine application.